Welcome to V is for Victory, a podcast about how small businesses overcome big battles. I'm your host, Jill Miller of Vera Creative, a boutique marketing firm in the Chicagoland area where I'm also a part-time professor of an advertising course. Join me as I talk with entrepreneurs about the challenges they faced as well as their strategies for success. Hello, listeners. I am here with Lynn Cherry, and she is the founder of Pickleball Fire, which is a website, a podcast, and a magazine. So she has found a way to monetize pickleball, and she's here to talk to us about that today. Lynn, thanks so much for your time.
I'm happy to be here today.
So tell me how you got into pickleball. Maybe tell our listeners what it even is if they don't know, and then we'll talk about all the goods, the website, the podcast, the magazine.
Okay. Pickleball is actually the fastest growing sport you've probably never heard of, but it's a combination of ping pong, tennis, and badminton. It's played on a court much smaller than a tennis court. It's actually played on the same size of a court as badminton. And really pickleball became popular, especially I'd say in the last 5 years. I just found out about the sport when I moved to Connecticut from Texas in 2018. In Texas, when I was there, I had never heard of the game at all. And it wasn't until I came to Connecticut and I was looking for something to do during the cold winter months that I saw the local recreation program had something called pickleball. So I'm like, oh, I wonder what that is. They say it's a sport. So I looked it up, got on YouTube, and I'm like, oh, that looks so fun. And so I went to the local gym when they were playing, and I just kind of poked my head in the door to see if it looked as fun as it did on YouTube. And it did, but once I was kind of at that doorstep, immediately when they saw me looking in the gym, somebody runs over and says, hey, do you want to play? And I'm like, well, I don't have a paddle. And they just said, oh, you can use mine. They put it right in my hand. And, that's one of the great things, too, about the sport. And I think a big reason why it's growing so fast is because people are just so welcoming everybody who wants to play. And that's also another great thing about the sport is that even if you've never played a sport before, you can get in, and the very first time you can hit the ball over the net, you can play a game, and I guarantee you will absolutely positively be having fun doing it.
That's so great. I love that there's a real sense of community surrounding the sport. I know, how you join like a recreational volleyball league or something like that, and everybody says, oh, you don't have to be good to play. You can just come. So my husband and I joined a team once, and we got yelled at by our team members several times. At least I did, because I would like dodge from the ball, and everybody would say that it was just all fun and everybody was just there to have fun. But there were definitely some people who were there to win, and they would slam the ball and spike the ball in your face as hard as they could. And when they found out that you were the bad player, you can bet that ball was coming to you every single time. And so it was a little off-putting because we were told that we didn't have to be any good. But then when we got there, the expectation was a little different. And I'm glad that this was, this sounds like it's not like that. But I bet there is some competitiveness to it if you want there to be. Is that correct?
Absolutely. There's some people who I know who they're recreational players, but they play 7 days a week, both in the morning and in the afternoon, evening. Now, those are going to be the people who are really taking it more seriously. But then I would also say that that's how addictive the sport is, because it is so much fun that you can get just recreational players, out a couple times a day playing the sport. But yeah, those people are going to be really competitive. But what I think is great is there's been so many times where I've been just dropping in to play. And when you drop in typically for pickleball, you can have the really competitive people, but then you have also the first-timers. And I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody on the court who had never played the sport before, but there's generally pickleball is played as doubles rather than singles. So you've got 4 people on the court. So even if you've got somebody who is a beginner, you can still have play points and get into rallies, because it is really easy to, take a paddle and hit the ball over the net. It's not like tennis where you need a lot of proper technique. Pickleball is just not like that, and the big reason for that is because it's played with something really similar to a wiffle ball. So what I always say to people is, if you can throw a wiffle ball over the net, if you can throw the ball over the net, you can play pickleball. I mean, it's really that easy. It's actually a kind of a similar motion when you kind of throw the ball underhand over the net to what's called like a dink in pickleball, which is a soft shot. So, yeah, I mean, nowadays there's even a pro tour, so clearly there is a wide range of people who play the sport.
Wow, that sounds super fun. So in 3 years, you went from never having played to now being the founder of Pickleball Fire, which incorporates a website, a podcast, and a magazine. Take me through that journey.
That's been really interesting. I've basically, after I first started playing, I'm like, this is such a great sport. And so just a couple months after I started, I created a website. And I'm somebody before who never really had kind of a content-based website. I had websites, but I was doing like software as a service type business model. But this was something that I didn't really have any plans or intentions to make money from. I just wanted to, put some content up there that I thought could help other people, because even at that time there were a few pickleball sites, but really not that many. And so I started, I had a background in I've got a master's degree in physical education, so I started to, write about the sport and how to play it and different things. And then I realized that, there's a lot of information kind of spread out through the whole internet that had, information on pickleball tournaments, clinics, places to play, just everything. And so I started to bring all that information also onto the website, just as a way to help people, have everything in kind of one place. And so that's pretty much how the website started. And I didn't really do much more than those things. And I would generate a little bit of income from Amazon affiliates, and then from also Ezoic, which is basically like Google Ads. So there was a little bit of money that kind of came in through that, and I didn't really think much more seriously about monetizing. But during the pandemic, October 2020, I was, couldn't do anything. It was getting cold here. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got so much free time and I can't go do anything. So I went ahead, and that's when I started the Pickleball Fire podcast. So that was again, I also had a journalism background, so it was pretty comfortable for me to interview people, and I was working actually full time at the time, and I had to get really efficient in producing the podcast, so I got it down to a real system that I could basically do an interview and get the podcast out within about an hour and a half time period. So what I realized, though, was that when I did the interviews for the podcast, I'm like, there is just so much content in these interviews, and I'm like, a lot of the pickleball audience is actually people over 50. At least it had been actually until the pandemic. And I'm like, for a podcast, that's not really a big target group. People over 50 don't, a lot of them don't listen to a lot of podcasts. Needless to say, especially if you're over 70 or what have you. So I realized that, I could take the interviews that I did on the podcast, and, I'm interviewing people in the industry, I'm interviewing professional pickleball players, and I'm like, I can write that up into articles and basically create a digital magazine, and I will reach so many more people. So that's actually how I started the magazine. The first issue came out in January, and I publish it every other month. So that's been kind of an interesting process, and that's something that I just quit my full-time job because now my audience is getting big enough. So both for the podcast and for the magazine, those are assets that can be monetized through advertising and sponsorship. So that's kind of my next phase.
Oh, that's such a great story. I love it. You're an absolute go-getter, which I also love because we talk a lot about on this podcast how a lot of people think things have to be perfect before they get started, and they kind of get stuck in their own way and never really move forward with their goals or their dreams or their visions. And it sounds like you're a little bit more like me, where you come up with an idea and you make it happen. You're an executor, and I love that. So I want to know a little bit more about when you started, about the advertising side. How did you get sponsors? So moving now, listeners, into business-to-business marketing. How did you get sponsors for your podcast and as well for the digital magazine, and what did you learn along the way?
Yeah, that's actually, I'm kind of beginning that journey. And what's really interesting, and I spent a long time looking at it before I decided to quit my full-time job, but for the magazine, there are media companies which do ad sales. So right now I'm kind of vetting some of those organizations, and basically they will go out and get sponsors, advertisers for you, and their cut is typically about 20%. Now, my personality, that's something that is probably not a good fit with kind of my skill set. So that's why that's something that I had planned to outsource. Now, I kind of say that historically that I had planned to outsource that because recently here I was approached by somebody in the pickleball industry and they approached me through actually knowing about the magazine. And they approached me about a relationship where they would go out and get the advertisers and sponsors. And at this point, I can't reveal a whole lot about that. But,
sure.
Obviously having somebody within the industry who already has connections to, paddle manufacturers, people who put on camps and what have you, that would be even better than working from somebody who's really at an agency who doesn't necessarily have context in the sport. Now, of course, I've got from interviewing people on the podcast, I do actually have kind of a list of targets for sponsorship. So that's something that another great reason to do a podcast is, just making those connections. And I kind of purposely did that when I started the podcast because I wanted to meet people in the industry because I thought it opens up, networking and different options.
For sure. Yeah, I always tell my students, because I teach at a university, that the ad sales is a great entry-level position to get your foot in the door for marketing and for advertising. I teach an advertising course. So I love that you bring that up. And then you're right, like having the closer you can be to the industry and the brand, and the more the person understands it, the more they can get relevant advertisers, which is just keeps your audience a little bit more engaged. And I love that you kind of turned your podcast into a little bit of like a self-serving project where you could grow your own internal network as well. And I definitely have been able to do the same because I've just interviewed so many unique people, and I feel like even podcasting is a great community. And since joining Podmatch, like I've never said no to anybody. Nobody's ever said no to me to be on the show. Everybody is super helpful. Everybody wants to keep in touch and just remind you that if you need their services, they're there to help. So I feel like the podcasting world is a great little world in itself to be in. Is that kind of going to be your route then for the digital magazine as well, for securing advertising there, the same route as the podcast?
Yeah. I think it's going to end up all being tied in together. And, I have to say for your listeners, I would have never imagined the connections I would make through the podcast. I mean, the smartest business move I think anybody can make is to start a podcast. So, I'm somebody who I'm talking to like the top pickleball players in the world, and like I said, the sport is very welcoming, and even at the top level, they're all there to really help promote the sport, because then that ends up helping people in general. But yeah, and from an advertising viewpoint, I'm expecting the kind of the podcast advertising and the magazine advertising, those will probably end up being package type deals.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say package deal. Took the words right out of my mouth. So talk to me about, so now switching back to the sport itself, it's global, I would imagine. Where is it really big in the world? Are there certain pockets of the world where it's bigger than others?
Certainly you've got more people playing, I think, in the USA and Canada than obviously anywhere else. But what's interesting is that there's a couple of different organizations within pickleball, and one of them being the International Federation of Pickleball. I was just looking at their website the other day, and they now have, I think, 58 member countries. And so the sport, I think, now is on 4 different continents. And, just to give you an example, actually just 2 weeks ago, I think it was, they had the English Open, which is their big tournament there in England. And I had interviewed Karen Mitchell from Pickleball England on the podcast, which is England's official governing body. And I've got one of the really well-known English players who will be coming on the podcast, I think, next week. But I've also have a friend, Scott Golden, who he does a lot of commentary, and he also plays at the highest level in the sport. And he does a lot of TV commentary and live streaming commentary. He is going to Czechoslovakia, I think, in another month or so for a big tournament there, and I think he's actually going to do some broadcast coverage. So, I mean, it is absolutely everywhere, and it's a pretty inexpensive game to get involved with. And the New York Times called pickleball the best pandemic sport, because you can, pandemic-friendly sport, because you can basically set up a pickleball court in your driveway. And then, getting into the sport from a monetary perspective, you can spend $100, maybe a little bit more if you get a regulation-sized net. And, you've got 4 paddles, couple balls, and you just need 3 friends or family members, and you can go out and play.
I love that. Do you think that then there is a specific demographic right now? Is it more of a certain generation that is playing? What are you seeing in terms of who is latching onto the sport in this moment?
It is, in this moment, this people coming into the sport, they're much younger. Actually, I was having a blast a couple days earlier in the week, and one of the guys he's actually, I'm in my late 50s, and I think he's in his probably early 70s. He's like, come on, Lynn, let's take on these young guys. And I know one of them is college age, and the other is probably in his 20s. And being there was 3 men on the court. They were actually doing a lot of talking smack, we'll say, and they all know each other really well, and it's all in good fun. But it was the old guys who still came out on top. So the young guys need a little bit more experience.
Oh, that's so fun. Great. Well, that's great. So what else do we have going on? What do you want listeners to know? I mean, you've covered a lot already just in terms of how there's a great sense of community. It's so easy to pick up. You've been able to monetize it. What kind of message do you have for people just getting into the sport?
Yeah, I think pickleball is growing so fast. I mean, it grew like 20% in 2020. And from a business perspective, there are just so many opportunities. Whether it's now we've got professionals who are making a living at the sport in 2020, worst time ever, but 2 different professional tours started. And actually they're both definitely thriving in 2021. But, even if you're somebody who's not going to, take the sport to that level, there's opportunities, whether it's, running tournaments, being teaching pro, having designing clothing, a line of clothing around pickleball, selling paddles. This is like, it reminds me, because I'm old enough, it reminds me of just kind of the internet getting started. And, just all of a sudden it's going to explode. So from a business perspective, if you can think of something that happens in another area, whether it's a sport or, any other business, and kind of take and bring that to pickleball as an opportunity, you will probably do very, very well. It's kind of like definitely getting in on the ground floor.
Wow. Super cool with the clothing line. That just sent my brain in a million different directions. And somehow it landed right back on my students for this semester. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, and you don't have to answer, but I want you to think about it. When I teach my advertising course, I procure a client for my students to do market research, to do strategies for different types of advertising and marketing, and then they have to put together an entire plan and pitch it to the client. And if you're open to being our client for this semester, that could be really cool, because the students are mostly art and business majors. And I think the art majors would have a lot of fun if they could design clothing wear or T-shirts or, I try to make it as true to life as possible in terms of experience. They get I would work with you and say, okay, what is the budget for them to work with if they were to come up with an advertising campaign or something? I don't know. So I feel like there's a really good opportunity for you to do a little bit more outsourcing and get some even more great ideas from the students, because the students are great. I mean, they blow me away. I know that for sure. And they typically blow away the clients too with some of their really unique, great ideas. So something to think about if we partner up this fall. There's very little work on the client end. It's mostly on our end. We end up having to ask the client a few questions. Sometimes the client will volunteer to come in and speak with the students and give them kind of an overview. Otherwise, this podcast would probably serve as just a fine overview for them. But I don't know. It popped into my head. I'm putting you on the spot, I know, asking you about that. Something to think about. So, yeah. Yeah,
I would definitely love to explore that. I was, in my many moons ago when I was going through my graduate studies, I did a lot of, teaching at the university level. So I understand, bringing the experience to the students. I mean, that's the best thing possible for them.
It is. And, I didn't get that experience until I was in grad school. It was our capstone class for marketing, and we got to come up with an advertising plan for the Metra, which is the train system around here in the Chicagoland area, and it was terrifying, actually. It was a really bad experience for most people for that semester. And I remember actually our teacher, she kind of yelled at the client because they were so rude and mean to us. But it didn't scare me that bad, because now that's kind of the experience that I try to emulate for my students. But my students are all undergrads, so I feel like it's even better, because rarely do you get the opportunity as an undergraduate student to take on a real client and to pitch ideas to a real client. And heck, even in an entry-level position, you are rarely the person pitching your own ideas to the client. So it's a really great opportunity. I'll send you some material, and you can kind of take a look at it, and maybe we can partner up. That would be, I think that would be super fun.
Right.
So is there
any?
Yeah, thank you. See, podcast 101. You never know what opportunities are going to come up. So what else do you think people should know about pickleball, either the sport or like we've been talking about, how to monetize it? Like what's kind of the message or a big lesson, big takeaway do you think is being offered right now?
You know, the sport is something that it's, in terms of where it's going, I would kind of speak to that because I don't think I've done too much of that so far, is that,
right.
You know, if you talk to everybody in the industry about, you know, where do you see pickleball going, everybody always says, we want to get the sport in the Olympic Games. Well, that's going to happen, but in talking to people who know way more than I do, you know, the process to get a sport into the Olympics, it's, you know, could be a 20-year process to get a new sport in. Sometimes the sport can come in at least as an exhibition sport, but even something like that, it definitely takes a while. But the thing that I'm seeing happening much more quickly, as you might imagine, is getting pickleball into schools and getting juniors into pickleball through leagues and through clinics. I had somebody on the podcast who was very instrumental in Florida, because apparently even in Florida, which is actually, you know, the hot spot of pickleball besides Arizona and California really, is that apparently until just within the last year, there were not any leagues or clinics, group clinics for kids. And so you'd go work one-on-one with an instructor, but there wasn't anything like in a group setting. So that's one thing that, you know, Adam is doing, is bringing pickleball to kids, and he's working with a number of other people throughout the country to bring the sport to juniors, and everybody wants to work to get it into the schools, because that's really how you grow the sport, and then also are going to get it into the Olympics, because you have to have those young people playing. Now, a lot of people who the top people at the game of pickleball right now are really the people who have, most of them have a tennis background. So they were really high-level college players, even some, you know, kind of low-level pros. So those are the ones who are really succeeding from an athletic perspective at the game, because they had that racket sports background. But anybody can enjoy the game, and, you know, that's, you know, I go to the courts and I see, you know, grandma coming there with their grandson, and they're both, you know, playing on the same court and both enjoying everything.
Yeah, definitely family friendly, and I think I was reading that that's how it got started, right? It was started by some dads who were looking for something to do with their kiddos.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, the sport was invented over 50 years ago. It started in 1965, and yeah, you had like 3 families together, and I think they were going to go out and play a game of badminton, you know, and as it turned out, they couldn't find the shuttlecock, so they found a wiffle ball, and then they kind of realized, well, that's not going to work very well with a badminton racket since it's got strings, so that's when they found ping pong paddles.
Got it.
The ball was, and then they realized that, oh, yeah, you know, we want the kids to be able to enjoy the game, so they lowered the badminton net, so the pickleball net is about the same height as a tennis net.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah,
so that the kids could easily play the game. But and you know, I think a lot of people are kind of dissuaded, or not a lot of people, but you know, I've had people on the podcast who said, yeah, I really didn't want to even try the game because it was called pickleball, and it's kind of like, what's that? Well, there's a couple stories as to how the sport got its name, but probably everybody's favorite is apparently when they played pickleball, the founding families, one of them had a dog, and the dog would go and grab the pickleballs when they were playing, and you know, kind of run after it, run away with the ball. So the dog's name was Pickles. So that's the story on how the sport got invented.
Pickleball.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I think there are some people in pickleball who initially thought, oh yeah, they need to kind of, or in the last few years kind of thought, oh, they really need to change the name of the sport. But now I've got, you know, men on the podcast are saying, oh, yeah, they should never change the name of the sport. It is pickleball. So that is one thing I don't think will ever change about the sport.
Good. I like it. How difficult would it be, do you think, or is it already at the park district level?
It's a lot of times what they'll do is they will convert tennis courts because, unfortunately, tennis is kind of a declining participant base. So you can typically you can take one tennis court and convert it into 3 or 4 pickleball courts. So that's definitely something that's going on in the industry. Where I live here in Connecticut, there's a lot of dedicated facilities now, whether they're outdoor parks or even now we're getting indoor facilities. And, the game, of course, it can be played in a gym. And, I had somebody on the podcast, too, who basically said, if you're a tennis center or if you've got, like, basketball courts and you're not utilizing the courts also for pickleball, then you're definitely losing money.
Yeah.
Because one thing about pickleball is a lot of people play during the day. So if you've got a gym, most gyms, you're busiest first thing in the morning, like early before work, and then after work. But pickleball players absolutely positively play during the day. And the funny thing I learned this summer was it's not everybody who's retired because, like I said, there was a lot of young people out joining us because they were, off from, on spring or college break or what have you. So, yeah, it's been great.
And how do you think the younger generation is finding out about it? You kind of stumbled upon it. It seemed to be a little bit of divine intervention there, at least divine career intervention, because it sets you on this great path. But how do you know, are you tracking how the younger generation is finding out about it? Do you think it's social media mostly?
Yes, actually, well, that and probably their parents or grandparents. But, yeah, that's one of the things that's talked about a lot with the sport is that, we need to have more things on YouTube. There's, one gentleman I talked to on the podcast, too, has been putting a lot of content out on TikTok and said, I know with TikTok that we are introducing the sport to people who have never heard about it by putting out some cool videos, which they are. Because at the highest level of pickleball, it's a very fast sport, and you need very quick hands, and these people are just amazing athletes. And so they can return so many balls and track down so many balls, and it's very entertaining, just to see a couple minutes snippet. So absolutely, that's how the younger generation is coming to the sport, both through social media and their parents and grandparents.
Yeah, I right away get the envision of like Olympic ping pong. I grew up playing ping pong in my basement with my family, but to see people at the high level playing it, you can't even see the ball. It's like, and they stand 10 feet from the table, and it's crazy insane, and it's extremely entertaining to watch. So I imagine because this is a hybrid of those 3 sports that, I'm smiling. I'm going to go YouTube those videos as soon as we're done with this interview. That's great. Lynn, what else? Let's just do some rapid fire here questions, maybe a little bit more get to know you. What took you from Texas to Connecticut?
To be close to family. I actually grew up originally in Southern California, but went to graduate school in Texas. And then I came out to Connecticut for kind of the other side of the family. So just family. But it's been an amazing ride. Let me put it that way.
Nice. What do you guys like play music while you're playing pickleball, or is that a distraction?
I don't know if I've ever really heard much music when it comes to pickleball. The actual sound of the ball hitting the paddle is something that actually, it's quite loud, and that actually attracts many people to the game. I've had so many people say, I was walking by a gym, and all of a sudden I heard this noise, and I couldn't figure out what it is, so I had to go look. So probably not a whole lot of music, I don't think, with pickleball.
That's kind of cool. I was going to ask you what song is stuck in your head right now. That's where that question was going. If there's any song or lyric or anything that's stuck in your head.
Certainly, one of my favorites, because I was always into sports, was "We Are the Champions" by Queen. That was just that sticks in my head from high school, actually.
Yep, mine too. My dad always would say that we need to put that on our hype tape, on our psych tape, when we were warming up for our gymnastics competitions. That was his jam. And yeah, that definitely gets stuck in my head too. That's great. Any books that you've read lately, or are you not a big reader?
Interestingly enough, I listen to a lot of books on audio because I walk a lot besides playing pickleball. And I tend to like science fiction. Right now I'm kind of going through the episodes of The Expanse, which has been a series on Netflix. And that's hoping they'll have the next season out really soon.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out. Are you a dog person or a cat person?
Cats. Currently I have two. And one of them is very, loves people. He's also a very patient cat. He's just very, very gentle, great personality, though. It's like he really had a hard time during the pandemic because there was basically nobody coming in or out of the house, so he didn't get to socialize very much.
My sister always gets the friendliest cats, too, that they love playing and they love people. And so her most recent cat, her name is Lola, and so I always get Barry Manilow's "Her Name Was Lola." She was the Coco Cabana song stuck in my head, and my 3-year-old daughter sings "Her Name Was Lola. She was a show cat." Instead of a showgirl. It's so cute. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so tell us a little bit more about how people can connect with you and find you or the sport or get to the magazine, the website, all the goods.
Right. They can go to pickleballfire.com. Just at the top menu, you will see the podcast and the magazine links to those. And then just if you want to learn more about the game on the home page, there's basically something that says learn about the game. And, it's kind of the best resource, I think, for your audience. You can also find me on Facebook, and it's under Pickleball Fire, too. But, you can shoot me an email if you have any questions. It's Lynn, Lynn, at pickleballfire.com.
Awesome, and I will link all of those in the episode notes. Thank you so much for your time today and for bringing us into your world of pickleball. I'm super excited for my listeners to hear this episode because it's much different than some of the other ones that we've recorded. And you're right, I'm excited for you and I'm excited for the sport because it might not be new, but there are so many opportunities that sound like that are going to be unfolding just in the next couple months to couple years for the sport, and that's just always something exciting to be a part of. And I would definitely encourage my listeners that if you're feeling like you want to get into something that's on the cutting edge, this would definitely be the sport.
That's true, and thank you so much, Jill, for having me on today. I really enjoyed it.